lived there. That was his home. That was his wife. That was his family. And so as she had a child, he took that child, and oh my goodness, he took care of that child. He raised that child. He taught Joseph about his salvation moment at Bethel when he saw Jesus, or the angel of God on the ladder. He taught him about the time that he met Jesus at the river Jabbok, and there where he had the limp that he had, and where he had met Christ again, or the angel of God, and had changed his name from Jacob to Israel. He taught him all of these things. So Jacob was a spiritual young man. He knew God. He knew God early in his life. He was raised with Jacob training him in that. He was also raised that Jacob, by the time Joseph was born, Jacob was a rich man, a wealthy man. And so he was raised a wealthy young man, okay? So for him to be in the position he's going to be placed in today, it wasn't unfamiliar to him. It was, but it wasn't. I don't know how I can say that any different. But he was raised to be in that position. And he was treated with that kind of respect. But yet, here we find him, he goes from the pit to the prison. He goes from a servitude to the lord of one of the lords of Egypt, the prime minister of Egypt. And so throughout all of that, Jacob kept his composure. Every task that he was given, he's a slave. He comes into Potiphar's house, and he immediately, rather than whines and moans and goes off in a corner, is all upset because he had been taken down from a very rich son to now poverty. And he's placed into this situation. He's sweeping floors and cleaning up, wiping up trash and things like that. He starts off as a nobody, but he determined that he was going to be a somebody. And so he determined in his mind that he was going to serve God. God is who he was serving. And so he took that task, and within 10 years he was given the responsibility of all that Potiphar had. Matter of fact, the Bible says Potiphar didn't even know the money that he was making. All he knew was he had bread to eat. He had food to eat. And Joseph took care of all of that. But he did that not because he was a whiner, not because he was, somebody that hated the position that he was in. He didn't like it, but he took what he had and he did the best that he could do, and he set his mind out to be a man that would be a blessing to God. And in being a blessing to God, he became a blessing to man. And that's how our young people need to grow up, and we need to train them in that fashion. So that no matter what the circumstances that are dealt in life, they are not serving that circumstance, they're serving God, and God will get him through that circumstance. Do you understand what I'm saying? Amen. And so that's where we find Joseph today in this series. We're going to see a 17-year-old boy that spends 10 years in servitude, and then we're going to see him spend another 3 years in prison, and then he's going to be elevated to the prime minister. Of Egypt. Only God, right? But God has to take a man. And God has to take that man, and God has to move in that man's life, right? It didn't just happen. If Joseph had been Simeon, for example, this never would have happened. It never would have happened. It happened because God chose out a man, and that man was faithful to God and served God, and while serving God, he served his master and did the best that he could for him. When I was a young boy, this farmer asked me and a couple of my friends to go help him. He had a corn crop that he had cleaned the field the year before. the fall before. They had picked the corn. Well, he was going to get ready to plant the corn again, but he had some pigs, and he wanted us boys to go down the rows and pick up the nubblings that were left, the nubbins of corn, whatever corn had fallen down, the little ears and all of that had fallen down. And so we took off doing that. Well, it was springtime. We were a mess time we got to the end, all wet all the way down. I mean, everything, the moisture was on the ground. It was not a very, very good thing, and it seemed to be a stupid job. I mean, it wasn't a job you wanted to do. I mean, it just was bad. And we got to the end of the field, and my two friends, Joe and Bill, Joe Colliver and Bill Baird, told the man, well, they just said, let's quit. We're quit. I'm not going to do this. Let's quit. They quit. I didn't quit. And I'm not smart, but I ain't stupid. I didn't quit. And the guy said, after they left, he said, well, Jim, there's no need for us to continue this on, but I'll use you again this year. And he called me again when planting time came, and I was able to do other jobs for him. And I'm talking like a 10, 12-year-old boy, and driving tractors and plowing fields and doing things. But I got another job from him because I stayed faithful and I don't care. Whatever you give me, I'll do it. Not that I'm a better person than anybody else, but that's a kind of a character. If you're going to succeed, that's what you have to do. Do the things you don't want to do. And Joseph, for 10 years, was a servant. For 3 years, was in prison. And so now we get into this chapter, and I have lots of verses, so we're going to go. I have a clock back there. Good. I told the story of one time I give an invitation when I was pastoring. I give an invitation, and this couple came forward with this big box. I'm like, come on, they members already. What are you doing? This is invitation time. This is where we're wanting folks to come forward for salvation. They come forward and brought me a clock. Now, later, I put the clock all the way to the back. And it was so funny because during the end, close to the end of the message, you could see him turn around and look at that clock. That just made me, that's like saying sick 'em to a dog, right? Yeah, that ain't going to slow me down. Only Charlie can stop me. All right, let's go to verse number 33. Oh, well, 32, I said 32 on here. It talks about the dream being doubled. And as you go through the Bible, and you go through, Joseph had three opportunities with dreams here. He had 2 dreams himself, and we spoke about that, I think, at the close of last week. He had 2 dreams himself. One was all the other boys were around him and giving him obeisance. And then he had another dream where even his mother and father were there. And at the time that dream is going to be fulfilled, it won't be his mother, it'll be Leah that'll be there. But now we have, and then he says, then he had, the butler and the baker had dreams, and now Pharaoh has had 2 dreams. And he's saying because there's 2 dreams, it means that God will shortly bring it to pass, but it means God established it. These are from God, and this is what he is saying to Pharaoh. And then he goes on, he says, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man. So what he did is he gave these people, he gave Pharaoh the answer to his dreams. And what I begin to see out of this is that Pharaoh has had the magicians, which really he's had the wise men. He's had the elders of the city, the people you would look at as wise men. I don't know, our president has gathered around him billionaires. Now, most of them are pretty wise individuals, I would say. They have some wisdom in what part of life they are in, and that's who you would go to get answers through some questions. And so he had called the wise men, and they couldn't give him the answer to his dreams. Now, these dreams were specific dreams. He remembered the dreams. He remembered every aspect of the dreams, but nobody can give him a reason or an answer for the dreams because only God could do that. And there was a specific purpose for that. And so Joseph gave him the answers to the dreams. And then he explained to him that only God could do it. And God did. This was God's dream. And that it's going to happen shortly. Now we come and he says, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise and set over the land of Egypt. So now what he has done, he has not slowed down. He gave the interpretations of the dream, but now what he is doing is giving him what to do about these dreams. So he doesn't really hesitate. It doesn't sound like he asked Pharaoh if that's what he had dreamt. You see what I'm saying? It looks like Pharaoh told him the dream, he interpreted the dream and just kept it going. All right, this is the answer to the dream. You're going to have 7 years of plenty. You're going to have 7 years of famine or drought. And that's going to happen. And now here's how you handle that situation. Pharaoh, do this. Let him, this man that's wise and discreet. The word discreet means understanding. He said, look out a man that is understanding, a man of wisdom, and set him over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh, and let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint officers. In other words, let that man appoint officers over the land and take up a fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. So he's saying that he's going to take up 20%. Set somebody over them. In other words, at first I wrote tax collectors, but then I changed it in your notes to grain collectors. I don't know that you'd call these guys tax collectors. Now, some believe that Pharaoh paid for this 20% of grain. I don't know if Pharaoh paid for it or if they just took it. I don't know how it is. I don't know. But if he paid for it, then that's fine. It doesn't matter. But he did this. And appoint officers. In other words, they're going to do this in all the cities. So they're going to appoint men in each city around to collect this grain. A fifth part, that's 20%. That's a double tithe. And let them gather all. As a matter of fact, do you remember when tips were 10%? What happened to that? I'm getting back to where I go back to the 10%. I care for the people that's giving me the food. At the same time, they need to get a good pay. They need not ought to be reliant just upon tips. And it's like, I don't mind. I just keep throwing money out, how you do. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh and let them keep food in the cities. So they're not going to transport all of this food to one location, which would make sense, right, to keep it. When Paulette and I were going through up to see Pastor Matthew's father and get the tent. We drove through Illinois, going up towards Chicago, and then across and back down into Indiana. And they're just miles and miles and miles and hundreds of miles of grain, corn, and not soybeans, but soybeans, corn and soybeans. I mean, there was clouds of dust everywhere where they were harvesting the soybeans and the corn. And then you drive up on a place and there would be like just acreage of granaries where they were storing the grain. A farmer is one of the first commodity brokers that you ever. A farmer would lay up grain and wait to see what the prices were going to do. And then they would sell when the prices are high. That's the object of it. You understand that. Farmers, one thing people don't realize, most farmers rely on banks. They use other people's money and farm. So a bad year is not a good year. It's a real bad year. These folks are going to have 7 years of plenty. And I can't help but think that some of these farmers, if there's something happening, there's a change that's taken place, because now that Pharaoh has come into their cities and has dug pits in the ground or built buildings to store grain. And why? Why is that? Why is he doing that? And it had to be told them that this man Joseph has coming into town, and that this man Joseph has interpreted a dream of Pharaoh that there's going to be 7 good years and 7 bad years. If I know that, and I'm a farmer, and they're taking 20%, I'm putting at least 10% away. Right? Now, the ones who really get hurt are those who live in the cities. They have to buy grain as it comes, and the prices will get very expensive when there's no grain, when you have a drought. And so here we find, let them gather all the food for the good years to come, and lay the corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. So nowhere else in the world, which is the known world at that time was the East, nowhere else in the world are they doing this, unless somebody has come in and said, wait a minute, look what's happening over here. And so what's going to happen now is when the time of drought comes, like we're going to see in the next chapters, then people are going to have to come to Egypt for food. And this thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants. Now, his servants, I believe, would mean like his cabinet. These would be his closest shows. These would be the people that work for him, that are in the cabinet, our Congress and our Senate, which are not servants. I won't go anywhere with that. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a man as this? Can we find such a man as this? He's talking about Joseph. Joseph interpreted his dream. Now Joseph is giving him a plan of action to compensate or to work for his dream, to put that dream into practice. And can we find such a man as this? And it says, a man in whom the Spirit of God is. Pharaoh is honoring the God of Joseph. The Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim, that is the breath of God. That is the Holy Spirit that we know, the Spirit of God. This is that has the breath of God in him. That makes sense? The Spirit of God is in him. Can we find such a man as this? A man in whom the Spirit, the one with intelligence of deity, or the one whom the breath or mind of the divine is in him. He is lifting Joseph up to that elevation that he would need to be. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God hath showed thee all of this, there is none so discreet or understanding and wise as thou art. Well, again, in all aspects of this, God gets the glory. Remember when Joseph went to show Pharaoh the interpretation for the dream, just like when he went to show the interpretation of the dream of the baker and the butler, he said this interpretations are from God. And so he is not saying I am the one. Look at me. You know, we have preachers today that brag about how great they are and what they can do. Stay away from that. Don't watch it. Don't listen to it. It's evil. It's evil. It's not about the preacher. It's about the Word of God the preacher preaches. Preachers are men, just like any, and we're seeing them fall right and left. Why? Because they lift themselves up. They let down the guard. They're not. Yeah. It's sad. It's sad. No. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as thou hath showed all of this, because of your wisdom, because of what you've showed us, is there none so discreet and wise as thou art? Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. I don't know how much time they had. I don't know if you can grasp the concept of this young man just getting out of prison being handed the responsibility of all of Egypt. I mean, there had to be, I mean, just like our government has different facets, this is in charge of what? Education. This is in charge of this. This is in charge of that. This is in charge of that. And so you have people in those responsibilities taking care of those situations, tax collectors, whatever. And how can one man come in and immediately take that over? Well, Joseph's primary responsibility was the grain. But it appears, because what we're going to see next here, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, verse number 41, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring. I wrote down auto pen. That's not what it was. But almost, because with that ring, they would seal a document with wax, and the king would put his ring on that document, and that was his signature, that was his approval of it. Pharaoh took off his ring, gave it to Joseph. So whatever Joseph determined to rule, and whatever Joseph determined about this, any documentations that were sent out to the cities, every city would have governors and all of that, leaders in those cities, you understand. So going in and just taking over was you're going to have some documentation that you're doing it. And Joseph had the ring of Pharaoh. And so with that ring, he had the auto pen. He had the signature, and actually this was the signature of Pharaoh. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And he arrayed him in vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. I wrote down there they put a tie on him. In order to rule, when Pharaoh come out, there was no question who he was. You could look at his attire and know who he was. What he did with Jacob is he gave him his ring, and then he gave him the attire of a leader, of a supreme leader. Pharaoh was going to be the supreme leader. Joseph is going to be the prime minister. And so he has dressed him for success, right? He's dressed him so that when he walked out, people respected him. We talked about that in our men's meeting, in our table, and dress for success. You know, I talked to one of the grandsons. He's an attorney up in Indiana, and he's just getting started. And I said, where do you want to be? Well, I want to be a partner someday. I said, okay. How do the partners, look at the partners, how do they dress and act? Because he wasn't wearing a tie. And he said, oh man, they have tie and you know, they're always dressed in a nice suit. I said, well, if you want to be where they are, dress like them. You elevate yourself. And he is elevated now and given that ring, he is now placed in that position where he is a leader in Egypt. Not a leader, but the leader in Egypt. Wow. How could he do that? Two ways, I think, maybe many more. He was trained by his father to be a leader in Israel. He was not trained like the other boys. He would go out. His purpose for going to see his brothers was not to help them and to work with them. His purpose was to go check on them and see how they were doing. What did they need? What directions could he give them? Now, they weren't going to listen to any of his directions, and they didn't like him from the very beginning. But they didn't like him because they were jealous, because the father was raising him for the purpose that we see him in right now. So Joseph, this was not something Joseph was raised for this position. He labored for this position. And number two, God gave it to him. And God was in him moving and working and giving him understanding and giving him wisdom. So he was exactly where God wanted him to be and God had trained him to be. But don't forget, he had to go through the pit, the prison, servitude, do a lot of things he didn't want to do to get to where God wanted him to be. Our life is not easy. If your life is easy and has been a gravy train, well, good for you. Life doesn't normally go that way for most of us. But if we serve God, we can close out our life knowing we did what God wanted us to do. Isn't that great? I can't think of a better thing than to know that. I got a phone call this week. A friend of mine that I've known for 25 years, 20, maybe closer to 30, 25, has got a week to live. He's a Lebanese man, a Catholic, I think. I tried to call him one last time. I didn't know he was in that condition right now, and I wasn't able to get to talk to him. We just don't know. We don't know. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. I can see Pharaoh now with Joseph. Now, perhaps Joseph was kneeling in front of him when he started giving him the interpretation of the dream. Joseph has now been elevated to stand beside Pharaoh, And I can see Pharaoh now say, seeing I have given you all the land of Egypt. I don't hear Joseph saying anything. The next words we're going to hear Joseph say is Manasseh. Okay, we got to run now, I guess. Pharaoh took off the ring, gave him the ring, cold chain. We got all that. And he made him ride on the second chariot. And then it says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all of the land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh called his name Zohanath Penatha. And I know you all could have pronounced that better. And his wife was Asenath, the goddess of Neith. And her father was Potirath. Now, the last letters of his name, R-A-H, it means God, sun God, the sun god of Egypt. I would assume this man here was probably in the midst of Pharaoh, maybe a highly elevated priest that he relayed to often. I would assume Pharaoh knew this man very well. And I would assume his daughter was beautiful because Pharaoh was giving Joseph the best. The best. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out in the presence of Pharaoh and went out throughout all the land. He didn't stop. He just took off running. And the 7 plenteous years of the earth brought forth handfuls by handfuls. You ever reach into a bucket of corn or something and you pick it up and the corn just overflows out of your hand? Or wheat or what have you, you reach down and pick it up and it's just flowing out of your hands. It's just like give and it shall be given unto you. Pressed down and shaken together. I was loading some flowers in sacks and this weekend because the guy that we hired to do it didn't show up. And so, and my wife called him and told him that he should never show up again. Anyway, I took the sacks and I'm shaking the sacks. What do you do for that? It presses it down to where you can get more in the sack. And that's the way giving and your tithes and offerings, that's what that's all about. I mean, you're giving and God gives you back. And here's what he's saying, that same thing. And he gathered up all the food 7 years which he had in the land. And the food of the field which he had round about every city, and he laid it up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn and as the sand of the sea. If I'm a rancher or if I'm a farmer, this is heaven to you. You're hiring every guy in town that you can to get out, come out to the field and help me harvest. We have plenty. Ruth, you come on too, Ruth. You can get the corners. There's a lot. We'll even lay some out for you. Plenty. It was everywhere. Man, I mean, you talk about making a wife happy. There were some rings bought during that day. Clothes. Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea until he left numbering, because it was without number. And unto Joseph was born sons before the years of the famine with his wife. And the name of the one son was Manasseh. That's the firstborn. Now, one man said that these were twins. You only find that once. But I don't think they were twins necessarily. Manasseh, what does that mean? What does that mean? Joseph, what are you doing? He's in the middle of this great time in his life. What is this name that you're giving to this son? It's forgetting. Forgetting all of this. He's got a new life, a new wife, and a new son. Forget the past. Don't let the past cloud you. Forget it. And the name of the second was Ephraim. For God caused me to be fruitful. I'm wondering why those two things, why when Jacob in chapter 48, Jacob crossed his hands as he blessed them. I'm wondering if that's why, because Manasseh was forget me, but the other was fruitfulness, and Ephraim was the one that was blessed. I didn't get through all the verses, but you get the idea. At the end of this, there'll be a drought. Oh, beautiful day. Woke up to balloons going overhead. These big balloons. I always wonder how they land those things. I know, Charlie, I know. Go ahead, open the door. We're done. Father, thank you for the wonderful day. Bless our service this morning. Be with Brother Han as he brings the message.